Hi, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining this hybrid event as part of the Hong Kong 45 Tech Dispute Series. Hong Kong 45 is a network of young professionals in arbitration with the aim of promoting the use of arbitration in dispute resolution and also Hong Kong as a seat. My name is Jennifer, and I'm a Hong Kong 45 committee member. By day, I'm also a tech and data specialist at Pinsent Masons, leading their technology and data disputes. I'm very delighted to be joined today with brilliant experts from BRG and PwC, who will be demystifying expert evidence in the blockchain and taking us through the expert's role in technology claims. A very brief introduction for now. I've got Luke Sellers with me Luke with me in person, and also Brent Sellers, his colleague from PwC in Singapore. I'm also joined by Eric Gunawan. Can you wave, Eric? Yep. And also his colleague Christopher Lim from BRG, also based in Singapore. This session will be split into two parts. The first part will be BRG looking at cryptocurrency, and the second part will be PwC looking into smart contracts. There will also be a Q&A session at the end of each part. So please, for those joining us virtually, type your questions into the Q&A box in the Zoom function. And I'll also keep an eye on the chat. And for those joining us in person today, please just feel free to raise your hand during the Q&A sessions. Great. I think we can start off with the first session now with BRG. May I welcome Eric, who is a director based in BRG's Singapore and Sydney offices. He's the head of BRG's e-discovery and forensic practice in Asia Pacific. He has over 18 years of experience in forensic accounting, compliance investigations, information governance, e-discovery, data identification and collection, and management of document review in both contentious and non-contentious matters. He's dealt with forensic and e-discovery matters from Australia, UK, US, and recently the Grand Cayman courts. He is joined by Christopher, who's an associate director, also based in BRG's Singapore office. Christopher has had 10 years of consulting experience in forensic and e-discovery, and is an expert in managing complex procedures in cross-border disputes, international arbitrations, and insolvency matters. Before joining BRC, he was also with a specialist consulting firm, where he headed the Singapore and Hong Kong practice for e-discovery and consulting matters. Both Eric and Christopher will take us through a cryptocurrency and how that works in the blockchain, how to run analysis and things through the expert lens, and also looking at when transacting and running cryptocurrency investigations. They will also take us through a case study where the audience will learn how the bad actors are identified and found. Very important steps when considering any legal recourse. Over to you, Eric and Christopher.
All right, thanks very much. Jennifer, can you hear us? And I'm just sharing our screen as well. Okay, great. Okay, so thank you to Hong Kong 45, to Jennifer as well, for the opportunity to present the crypto and blockchain today. So Eric and I will just share a little bit, and thanks Jennifer for giving us the breakdown of today's agenda. So as Jennifer mentioned, I think we'll touch base a little bit on numbers 1 and 4, which is the introduction to cryptocurrency as well as the future cryptocurrency. But we'll really delve down into numbers 2 and 3, which is the crypto crimes, especially from last year to this year, and then as well as a case study. The case study, although it will be somewhat basic, it gives a flavor of how the crimes are committed in the crypto market, and then hopefully we can share you a little bit of how it works, and then you can test it out yourselves. We'll be giving you all the information after this session as well. Okay, so I'll begin with the introduction to cryptocurrency. So just a quick definition of cryptocurrency. It's basically a digital currency that is secured through cryptography. Okay, so the popularity in cryptocurrency is really about its security and you being anonymous. Okay, so how does that work? So two things. One is you can create your own wallet and then you can remain anonymous in the internet. It is very different from, let's say, the banks wherein you need to submit, documents and they are able to identify a specific bank number to a certain individual. But I'll share a little bit more about this later on because there's a custodial type and also the non-custodial type. Okay, but I think one important thing is in cryptocurrency, there is something what we call the blockchain. It is basically a public ledger wherein any transactions that you do will always be publicly recorded, although anonymous, but it will always be recorded. So this is one key information that people need to understand, that no matter what you do, it will always be recorded in the blockchain. Okay. So I'll move to the next one. Just very quickly, just to share a little bit of trivia. So I think the most popular cryptocurrency everyone knows is Bitcoin, and it was really established in 2009 by somebody called Satoshi Nakamoto. So it's just a pseudo name. Okay, but the earliest form of crypto was actually established in 1996. Okay, so something called e-gold. It was popularized in the US, and to a certain extent, it actually reached a market value of 2 billion as well. And I think from last year to this year, crypto has been really the flavor of discussion for media and with everyone. Even if you go to Google and you type if you invested, 6 out of 10 initial suggested results will give you straight away everything about investing in crypto. Okay, so how do we actually use cryptocurrency? There's actually 4 main forms of it that we wanted to share with you today. And I'll be going through quickly each one. Okay, so for the first one is something called utilizing cryptocurrency through proof of work, or what we call the mining. So it's called mining because you'll need a strong video graphics card to be able to solve complex mathematical formulas. And then what basically happens is, as your computer is solving more of this information, you're actually creating blocks in the blockchain. So people can use that blockchain for their contracts and for their transactions. And then you, as the miner who is creating that, you're actually getting, your Bitcoin, your Ethereum, or so on and so forth. Okay. So this was popularized last year that, you can buy one machine, leave it at home, turn it on for 24/7, and then basically it's going to start generating crypto for you, which you can sell. Okay. The next one is proof of stake. So I would say this is somewhat the opposite of the mining, wherein if you are somewhat environmentally friendly or conscious, right, you don't want to contribute to the usage of electricity. So what this is you would actually purchase a portion of the crypto, and then what you can do is stake it, meaning you will actually put whatever amount of crypto you have purchased back into the staking platform. And then, you can, let's say, leave it there for 90 days, 180 days, and basically you will be paid back in a form of an interest. Okay? And the next one is just, it was popularized as well, what we call the play to earn. Okay? So basically you can buy tokens or NFT, excuse me, and you can basically play a game in the crypto market. So one of the most popular ones on the bottom left is called Axie Infinity. So basically you purchase this, somewhat looking monsters, and then you battle with other players. And if you win, then you get coins. And these coins can be exchanged for other crypto, or you can level up your team, or you can even just sell it as it is. Okay, so this was popularized last year, wherein as a sideline you can actually play games and then you're earning from it as well. Okay, and the last one, which I think has garnered a bit of popularity in Hong Kong as well, is what we call the NFT, or non-fungible tokens. Okay, so put simply, NFTs are digital art created by somebody, and they can sell it off Now, there's a couple of things that we need to understand for NFT, which is the terms whitelisting, minting, and floor price. So basically, when a project is created, you promise that you can sell a number of NFTs to the public. So let's say 1,000 of it. Now, there's going to be a lot of people who are interested to make a purchase. So what you can do is you create a form of whitelisting or giving priority to certain number of individuals if they have given some level of support to you, or they have shown that they somewhat deserve to be able to purchase a guaranteed slot for the NFT. And then once it's out in the market and you can start buying them, the act of purchasing is called minting. So you're actually purchasing one of the NFTs, and then from then there's going to be use cases of that NFT. But generally, you can also sell it, and depending on the market's sentiments, then we have something called the floor price, which is basically this is the lowest price value of that NFT that you can sell. Okay, so why did NFT become very popular? Last year there was, or sorry, a couple of months ago, there was a project called Moonbirds, and basically if you were whitelisted, you can mint for it at 2.5 Ethereum. Okay, now after everyone managed to mint it, the initial floor price was 27.1 Ethereum, meaning that if you purchase one of the NFTs of Moonbirds, then you can sell it times 10 of its value. Okay, and not only that, we actually see it in luxury brands. You'll see on the right side that companies like Dolce & Gabbana, Nike, who owns the RTFKT, Burberry, all these actually did some level of NFT wherein if you own an NFT, you are guaranteed a priority slot as well to make purchase for a physical item in the stores. Okay, and just lastly, before we delve into the crime, so we just want to share that although it sounds good to make all these utility for crypto, we also had the crypto winter or the bear market. So from 2.97 trillion, it's now down to 1.21. I think yesterday it's now below 1 trillion. So very similar to stocks and funds, right? It's very volatile. You need to do your research, and it's also affected by the supply and demand. There's also, to a certain level, market speculations where people are, fearing that they might lose out or they might not earn much anymore. There's also the sentiments and then government regulating this, as well as media hype. So a lot of these factors affect the pricing of crypto as well. Okay, so before we move to the next one, Jennifer, I'm not sure if you wanted to add anything to that one.
Yeah, thank you, Christopher. I just want to add in, some context in terms of arbitration. A lot of the times when we're obviously tracing and tracking, it is really to identify the wrongdoer. So the intended respondent or party to arbitral proceedings. The difficulty, after identifying the wrongdoer is really dealing with the service of the notice of arbitration. And sometimes, I think depending on what the finding is, parties would find that even if they know who the wrongdoer are, there are service difficulties within that. I will talk later on about the procedural side in arbitration proceedings, but for now, Eric and Christopher will continue to take us through tracing and tracking of the code. And I think all participants today will notice that it's not really a simple task, and often software will need to be deployed to help us locate. Back to you, Eric and Christopher.
Thanks, Jennifer and Chris. So I'll take the second section around the type of crimes and how do we essentially summarize how we can trace transactions. And then Chris will go on and deploying some case studies. And hopefully some of you who might be logging in from home might be able to follow through as well. I mean, you can actually use your PC to do what Chris is doing. But for those of you in the room with Jennifer and Luke, we'll send over some material at the end of this presentation. All right, so So there has been quite a few categories of crypto crimes, right? I mean, but I think I will summarize it essentially the top 6 or 7 that we are seeing in the world at the moment. I'll start by talking about rug pulls. Essentially, it is the most commonly seen in DeFi, decentralized finance. Basically, it entails developers creating new tokens and promoting them to investors, who then trade for the new token in the hope that the token will rise in value. But then in rug pulls, essentially the developers, once the value reaches certain numbers, they will then drain the fund from the liquidity pool, setting the value of the token close to 0 and then disappear. And I think we've seen, I think Chris put together some examples of cryptocurrencies that went into this bucket. You know, the Squid Game crypto is one of them, where, you know, essentially when it comes to a lot of these coins, you don't really need a lot of code audit. I mean, if you actually selling it to DEXs, which is a decentralized exchanges, you don't. I mean, there is no one that audits the code for you to create these currencies, unless if you're listing it to Binance or Crypto.com, Coinbase, CoinHaku, and any of that. I mean, if you're using a different exchanges, I mean, anyone can just simply create a currency and then get the hype going, marketing, get celebrities to pay for it, and then get the value up, and then suddenly it disappears. They sell and then disappear. So, I mean, that's the definition of rug pulls, and then we're seeing a lot of those, essentially what we call scam in the market as one of the example. Next, Chris. Now, the second one, I wouldn't say it is a scam, but I think it's more about the algorithm, the issue with the algorithm. I mean, you guys would have known Luna, essentially, it crashes about a month or 2 ago. I mean, that is the start of the what we call a crypto winter. I mean, it causes everything to tumble down. So essentially what Luna was is, it is a stable coin. Stable coin is pegged to a UST, US dollar. So $1 of UST is equivalent to $1 of Luna. The issue was that there was an entity that actually manipulate or sold essentially a large chunk of Luna that causes the currency to depeg against the US dollars. I think instead of actually $1, it becomes like 91 cents. So that causes panic. A lot of the entities, sell Luna in bulk, and that causes the depegging to be even more, bigger in value. So there is an issue with the algorithm, and then obviously that causes panic with people being able to try to sell the asset while it's still up there, and then causes the whole value to tumble down. And Chris, next point, I wanted to continue to talk about theft as well. So obviously, one of the main issues with the cryptocurrency, apart from the scamming, the theft, as well as the money laundering, is what we call a cryptojacking. So Chris talked briefly about the Moonbird, where someone enter into the system and then hack or stole over 29 Moonbirds, which value at 1.5 million. I mean, you're seeing a lot of these in recent months. I think Crypto.com was one of them that got hacked and then got crypto stolen from them. Essentially, the cause of that is security breaches, where hackers gain access to the exchange, private keys, public keys, and essentially it's equivalent of crypto currency of pickpocketing. And what I wanted to talk, Chris, next slide. The money laundering is obviously a big thing, right? I mean, that's one of the reasons why people use cryptocurrencies to hide essentially their transactions. About $8 billion falls under this category from 2021, which is an increase of 30% compared to 2020. Basically, the money laundering just moved their the hackers' ill-gotten fund to a service where they can be kept from the authorities and eventually converted to cash. It is why money laundering underpins all form of cryptocurrency-based crime. If there is no access, if there is no way to access the fund, there's really no incentive to commit the crime involving cryptocurrency in the first place. And obviously, because of the nature of the DeFi, decentralized finance, people are actually sending more money and doing money laundering using these services as opposed to using a centralized exchange like what I mentioned to you before, Binance and all that stuff. Now, this is just a summary of the type of crime and then the monetary value with regards to this category of crimes. I mean, I wanted to just quickly touch base on the ransomware and malware as well, because it forms part of the big chunk of the crypto crime. So Conti, essentially a Russian-owned and run ransomware strain by revenue in 2021, extorting at least 180 million from the victims. And also number 2 would be the dark side. Again, another Russian backing entity there. Malware, I mean, you would know, typical malware would be just someone infected your PC or your laptop with a Trojan. It gathers a lot of the data behind. When you're accessing your mobile wallet or any of these crypto exchanges, then potentially they can get access to your username, password. Obviously, 2-factor authentication would be a good idea. Send SMSs to your phone or to the authentication app, but it's not always foolproof, and hackers will always be able to find ways to get into your systems. Before I move to the next slide, just maybe a couple of things as well. I mean, we are seeing a lot of crypto is being used as geopolitical weapon. We've got, obviously saw the report about Russia before they start the invasion of Ukraine in January. Towards the end of January, they basically hammered the Ukraine defense system with basically a Trojan. And there's a lot of cryptocurrency that were part of the Ukrainian government being stolen, and obviously went into the mixing exchanges so that no one can actually trace them back to Russia. But more information gathered, it was believed that the Russian state was behind the activities. Next, Chris. Now, so I went through quickly about 5 to 6 categories of crypto crimes. I mean, how do we? Chris will show with you in details about how do we typically run this exercise using various tools available in our possession. But essentially, when it comes to crypto crime, you can see from the slide there, it is about converting your actual cash into coin, and then you use your coin to do your activities, go out, split, pay someone, and then that person will then convert it back into clean money. I mean, the issue with decentralized finance, unlike your typical banking and so on, is that it is very hard to trace because everything is decentralized. So next slide, Chris. So people like us and Luke and Brent from PwC, when we run across ways to identify ways to get the perpetrators, understand how the transaction work, it's always about follow the coins, follow the money, know your transaction, what we call a KYT, and basically work with the victim and see whether we can locate a lot of these transactions using the publicly available information on a lot of those crypto transactions or activities on the web. One thing I would say though, this slide, people might come across as being simple, but it is by no means. When you actually run your own investigation, it can be this simple. I mean, there's a lot of tracing to be done. Fund gets split into multiple wallets, and then there's a lot of mixing services where coins get swapped from Bitcoin to maybe another altcoins to essentially hide the trace. So there is a lot of things that us as forensic investigators need to think about when we help our clients or when we run a lot of these investigations. I'll pass it back to Chris to talk about the next steps and the case studies.
Sure. Thanks, Eric. And I'll just quickly cover like what Eric has already touched on. So, as the criminals try to hide their tracks, the investigators find a way to be able to see how they do their transactions. But at the same time, it's a competing game wherein the bad actors now try to make it more complex, try to add a bit more anonymity. So these are just some of the ways. So one is, for example, if you see the lower left picture, earlier the transaction would just be like, if I stole 5 Bitcoin, I transfer 5 Bitcoin, it's easy to trace that. But what they would do is they would split this into multiple amounts, into multiple wallets, so that it's harder to trace the actual total amount. There's also something called coin swapping. So for example, if the bad actor took 5 Bitcoin, they can actually swap it for, let's say, 50 or 60 Ethereum, or maybe swap it to Solana and all the other coins. That makes it increasingly complicated, because then you need to do the conversion. You need to understand how the transfer has occurred. And then lastly is also something called co-spending. So I would spend half of the Bitcoin that I've stolen. I would pay the other half to somebody, and then this other half would then transfer me back the 2.5 Bitcoin. So just again, for tracing purposes, it's complicated. The right side is what it would actually look like. When you work with crypto transactions, it's all in it's given to you in a hash. So, if you have multiple hashes, it becomes quite complicated. Okay. And then lastly is Eric touched this as well, which is the darknet. So you have anonymity on the crypto, then you also hide the IP. So it makes it more difficult. So then we jump into utilizing blockchain software tools, and I'll just focus on 2 of the big feature, which is using it for a reactive case or using it for a proactive case. So the first one is more on the reaction side, or when you are running an investigation. So when you use these blockchain software tools, there's actually a way to automate the path detection of the transactions. Okay, I'll move to the next one because I want to make sure that we have time for the crypto case study. But just to give you an idea of what it looks like, these are transactions over the net, and basically it automatically identifies you which are exchanges, which are P2P, which are those coin swappings, and which one's a gambling site. Okay, next one. This is an example of the Twitter scam, and you can see the complexity of how Bitcoin was transferred from the wallet to another. So again, the usage of tools will help you visualize how it looks like. Okay. And lastly, it's just proactive. So proactive is just if you know the wallet that you want to monitor, or someone that owns it, you can put it into the platform, and basically it will run risk scores, try to check if there's any anomalies or trends on it. Okay. So this is what it looks like, and apologies that we don't have a proper session, but a clear screen of it. But yeah, this will identify to you alerts as and when, so you don't have to be monitoring it 24/7. Okay, and then the last one is just KYT. So KYT is a group of researchers, software engineers will be actually consolidating known addresses, wallets, and then as opposed to you having to identify and tag it one by one, you have access to this. Okay, so I'll move to the case study, and I'll jump into the second one straight away, but I just wanted to quickly explain what the first one is. So custodial wallet is something that your wallet is with the exchange. So for example, like Binance, wherein you need to submit personal information, your ID. So then Binance actually has information on this wallet belongs to this person. So if you do something illicit or unethical, you can actually be traced back to it. Now, non-custodial wallet, you can basically create it easily in the on the web as well. And this one is you don't need to submit any information. The moment I install and create it, it's readily available for me to access. So then you keep your anonymity in this. Okay, so let's use a case study. What we did is we took one actual wallet from the internet, from Reddit, wherein somebody said that the cash was stolen. And what we'll try to do today is see that, can we actually trace back what happened to the funds that were stolen? Okay, so I'll exit out of my slides first and jump into my Chrome. Hopefully everyone can see my Chrome. Okay, so this is the actual website. This person said that they lost their money through a scam, right? So this is the wallet address that the transaction went into. Now, the first thing you can do is access this popular website called Blockchain Explorer, wherein I can just copy the link, the address, and run a search on it. And like I mentioned earlier, right, everything on this is on the public ledger, so the transactions will always be available. Now, if I look at this, I can see that it says that there were 2 transactions made, one for 0.21 Bitcoin, and then it was transferred out. But the difficulty with this is, like I mentioned earlier, a lot of this is, it's all in the hash, and it's quite difficult to visualize, especially if you're doing this on a manual basis. It requires a lot of labor from you. And, if you need to report back, then it's also somewhat difficult. Okay, so then we can use other means of tracking it. One of my, Eric and my favorite is actually the block chart, because it actually allows you to visualize it in an easier manner. So it's very similar to what I showed in the blockchain, but for this one, it will actually show you in a easier fashion. Okay. Now, one thing that makes all these to be, less complex is the use of visualization tools. So there's a freeware called Crystal Explorer. Now, what I can do with this is instead of seeing it from a transactional log type basis, right, I can actually interact and see it from a visual perspective. Okay, so if I click on this is the scam wallet. And what happened is this 21 Bitcoin came from this wallet. Okay, websites like this will actually give you some level of risk indicator, meaning that it may have been reported previously to be fraudulent and so on. But what we're interested in is we go back to what Eric said. We look at the start and the end points, and then we follow the money. So I would backtrack to the original, and I will assume that this is the user. Now, you can see that there are 342,000 transactions, and that wouldn't make sense because the person would be a single owner. So this is quite a lot of money. Okay. Now what we can do is, again, we can copy this, right? And I'll use another website. This is called Clank, which is what it does is it actually tries to identify, well, for free, that if it's an exchange address, if it's a personal address, so on and so forth. If we use those tools that I shared earlier, it all comes in a package. But for the purposes of using the web and what available resources there are, then these are some examples. Okay, so I'll just paste this address here. And then what we want to figure out is, where did this actually come from? Now, if you remember earlier, I mentioned about custodial versus non-custodial. Now, since this wallet came from Binance, then if you have enough information, you can actually go to Binance for assistance to say that this transaction here actually came from Binance and it's owned by somebody wherein my wallet was hacked, right? So I need to identify the person. Now, the tricky part here is obviously we're working with the victim. So we know that this is the victim. And what we want to know is what happened to her 0.22 Bitcoin. Okay. So since the starting point is not a valid because it's the victim, we need to now follow the money. So I go to the next one and I can see that it was transferred to this wallet. Now, again, you can do the same thing. Copy this, see if this is exchange wallet. Okay, and then if it's not, then unfortunately, if it's not identified by KYT or anything in the on the software, then we have to again follow the money. Okay, so I'll click on this. Now, what's interesting in this is you'll see that instead of going to another new wallet, you'll see that it took a route back, right? So what does this mean? This person actually put back the money into Binance, right? And what we mentioned earlier is now that we have this, I can actually just highlight this and then copy the transaction information, and then I can go back to Binance and tell them I need assistance because this transaction was part of a scam, and I would need assistance to see if you can help me retrieve the funds. So this is like Eric and I mentioned, a very high level example of how you can do an investigation on the crypto wallet. But and this is the foundation. But again, if we're dealing with multiple wallets, if we're dealing with more addresses, if we're dealing with 1,000 transactions, the coin swapping, and then let's say if it's an actual ongoing case, right? Then you'll see the money continuously moving as opposed to just right now it's just static there. And so there's a lot of things that can happen in between. But again, this is like the foundations we're in, how the crypto tracing can work. Okay. Now, all the information that I've shared with you, all these websites, like I mentioned, it will be on our slide. So, you don't have to work with this own transaction. You can actually work with different transactions. Reddit, Discord, all these information will have a lot of case study. I wouldn't say case study, but real life scenario. Okay. I'm not sure, Eric, if you had anything else to add on that one.
Yeah, just a quick one. Thanks, Chris. I think the goal for any examiners like us would be to find the exit point, right? So Chris, if you go back to that previous slide, what we call an off-ramp of any currency. So any transaction, sorry, Chris, the not on the slide, the transaction where it diverts. Yeah, this one. So the end goal for us is to actually find, where the fund originating from and when it gets converted to cash, or what is the end point. And then Chris mentioned, I mean, there might not be always an easy way. I mean, even once we found the off-ramp of the end address, there might not be an easy way to say, hey, this wallet belongs to this individual or an entity or a company, right? But it is always the first step. And then if they're using a centralized exchange, like some of the big ones that I mentioned earlier, then there might be a way then to maybe subpoena, work with the police or with the, with the government or what have you, to actually then issue a subpoena to Binance and say, hey, we've got a potential case here. Can you divulge us to who this individual who owns this particular address is, right? And even if the off-ramp is actually a private wallet, the transaction from the exchange database before it goes to the private wallet can potentially also be traced. So your off-ramp may not always be the end goal. I mean, you just have to essentially investigate all the chains involving this particular transaction. Now, before I hand it over to Chris and then to Jennifer, I guess from the investigator point of view, there is always a bunch of data sources that we can take a look at. I mean, we know that, I mean, I've got crypto asset as well. I mean, I'm using things like Binance and all that. So obviously your phone could potentially be one form of data sources to be investigated. I mean, obviously you've got the mobile wallets, you've got phones, I mean, you've got authenticators, you've got desktop wallet. I mean, you can create an extension on Chrome or Edge, and then essentially save your crypto keys there. And I mentioned earlier as well, I mean, a lot of people using a hardware wallet whereby they transfer the money onto the USB stick and then protect it, take it out. Obviously, it's very secure, but then there might be a risk for you to lose it, or the USB got corrupted and then you lose essentially all your assets. So quite a few things to consider when we look for data sources that might be relevant to the analysis. Chris or Jennifer, back to you.
Okay, thanks for that. Jennifer, did you want to add something? I can wrap up in about a minute or so for the last segment.
Brilliant, thanks, Chris. So after obviously the tracing, arbitrations commenced. Besides expert evidence, procedurally, there are things that practitioners can look out for in terms of interim measures. You know, where is the asset? Do you need to make use of injunctive type remedies available to you under the arbitration ordinance? Do you need to actually contact the crypto exchange platform to further identify the owner of the wallet? And there are also potentially joinder issues if you need to add additional parties to the arbitration proceedings. Likely, you know, one party may not want to engage too much. So what happens in terms of the conduct of the proceedings? Service I've already mentioned, documentation, how are you going to get your documents, what documents are available? These are all, you know, procedural factors that we need to consider when running one of these arbitral proceedings. When we do get to trial, you know, what if one party doesn't show up? You know, how do we make the award enforceable? So when we're actually doing, you know, these proceedings, as well as working with experts on this, it's also very important to make sure we bear all these factors in mind. Back to you, Chris.
Thanks very much, Jennifer. So I'll just finish up with the future of cryptocurrency. So, you know, we now understand what crypto is like. There's definitely a lot of investigation and a lot of scams, unethical activities happening. So where do we go from there? So I think from our end, we do see a strong adaptation of this, not only from governments, but also from countries and companies. So for example, in El Salvador, they actually purchase Bitcoin as part of their national treasury, and they entice people to start using as a form of transaction alongside the US dollar. We also see Ukraine, wherein they actually opened a wallet account where so people can start donating to them. And then even, you know, here within our neighboring countries, we see crypto being accepted. Similar to companies, we're starting to see that adaptation happening. So again, with all this adaptation, there's going to be more, unfortunately, areas for being scammed or, you know, the illicit activities. So there will be more cases around this. I think just on the side, aside from that, is I think just number 4. So I think about 2 months ago, there was actually news in Singapore wherein the NFTs were asked to be freezed in the blockchain. So I think this is a first. We haven't really seen a lot of court cases, you know, handling it in this manner. But like Jennifer mentioned, I think it will come a time wherein this will also be the regular type of cases that we will be seeing around. Okay. I'm sorry that we took a bit of time of the Q&A, but if you have any questions, Eric and my email as well as our QR code to the links are here. So feel free to let us know if you have any questions. You know, we're more than happy to share a little bit to, you know, deep dive into more cases that we have. And then, yeah, happy to give you this information as well, the sources, the links that we have used to demo earlier, so that if you want to test it out yourself, then feel free to do so.
Thank you, Eric and Chris. And we will be sharing the slides with all attendees today after the sessions. Does anyone have any questions? There was one question that I've been asked by a colleague actually earlier today to pass through, which is, what are the common difficulties that experts face in the tracing exercise?
Yep, and I think Chris, you can probably touch on that based on what you spoke earlier.
Yeah, I think really it's about if we're talking about a case that's ongoing. So when we say ongoing, like it hasn't been transacted over the exchange yet, but it's actually sitting in a wallet somewhere, and you know the money is constantly being diverted to multiple wallets, constantly going to coin exchange and so on and so forth. So that is difficult because you need to build your case very quickly. You need to build the facts of the matter very quickly. It's very similar to what we see in cyber crime cases, wherein the first 24 hours, or rather in crypto, the first few hours is critical to the case. So you need to establish the facts very quickly, and then you need to know how to use your resources in terms of should we start identifying that there's a certain area wherein we can start getting assistance to get this frozen up, or if not, then we need to continue tracing and see what would be our action towards it. So, similar to the Twitter scam we shared earlier, I think there was about 100,000 stolen there, but there's only like a few thousand that has actually gone out to the exchange. So there's actually 90% of the funds still going around for the past 2 years. And if you are up with that case, then how do you set up those precautions so that there's not going to be a exchange one time and then maybe everyone's sleeping and then you miss it out.
One thing, just another 30 seconds, Jennifer. I think one of the probably prominent difficulties in understanding or even tracing this transaction is really just the difficulties in getting you to the off-ramp point, right? I mean, that is basically the goal of any investigation. And typically, even when you get to the off-ramp, you don't really know who owns it. So that is what oftentimes that you may not get to the perpetrators based on just one transaction. So if you know that the off-ramp is this particular wallet, you can tag it. You can tag it to monitor it, so that if there's any future fund or coin that goes to that particular wallet, then hopefully you can bit by bit get a bit more information about who is actually sending, who is actually receiving it. So it is a combination of not just using like crypto analysis tool, but also a human element to it. What is the purpose of that person actually receiving crypto? If there is any CCTV involved, I mean, or any tracing on particular exchange databases, or any information that might be useful to then get you to the point where you can establish who owns that particular wallet. And it's always a difficult job. I mean, Chris mentioned go through a list of transactions and all that, but then you need more than just a list of hashes and all that to be able to get you to the endpoint.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. And I think, timing is certainly key for these types of disputes. And, when things do occur, it's, good to call an expert pretty much straight away and get them engaged as soon as possible. So the tracing and the tracking can start without delay. Thank you so much, Eric and Christopher from BRG. And as Chris has already mentioned, their details are currently on the screen, so feel free to reach out to them if you've got any further queries. We'll now take a 15-minute break and we'll be back at 1:15 for our second session. Thank you.
Thanks all. Have a good evening.
Everyone, cheers.
Brilliant. Welcome back to the second session. Further delving into the blockchain and looking at smart contracts now with PwC. We have Luke Groff in person with me at HKIC today. Luke is a partner at PwC's Hong Kong Forensic Science Services practice and leads the forensic technology team. He assists clients with complex engagements related to fraud, disputes, and regulatory response using computer forensics, fraud detection and analytics, and data-driven investigation techniques. He has been expert witness in HKIC related to cyber forensics. And I'm also joined here with Brent Sellers virtually. He is an associate director in the forensic services practice of PwC Hong Kong as well. Brent advises on risk and compliance matters for financial institutions and cryptocurrency focused businesses. He has led the development of PwC's Hong Kong's forensic services capability in the cryptocurrency and digital assets sectors. He has also conducted mandates for virtual asset service providers involving the investigation of source and use of funds raised in a token sale process, the development of compliance operating models, and the regulatory drive evaluation of financial crime-related internal controls. Welcome both Luke and Brent. They will be discussing with us today an example with Tether, which is a stable coin tied in with the USD, similar to the pegged kind of US and Hong Kong dollars. Over to Luke and Brent.
Thank you, Jennifer. Good afternoon, everyone in the room and also on the call today. And thanks to HK45 for hosting us, and thanks to Eric and Chris for the intro earlier into blockchain and some of the tracing techniques. As you can see from our presentation title, we're going to be looking really into smart contracts. So we're going to spend a bit of time on what they are and try and walk through an actual smart contract so you can get a bit better sense of how they actually work and what they are. And then we're going to look through in the second half of the presentation an actual case study, a thought up case study, which we'll talk about, which sort of ties in where arbitration may sort of come into resolving disputes around smart contracts, particularly what are some of the types of things that could come up in dispute regarding smart contracts. So we've done introductions, so I'll pass over to Brent, who's going to talk a little bit about smart contracts, some of their features and some of their uses. So Brent, over to you.
Thanks, Luke. Yeah, so starting out with, I guess, the very simple question of what is a smart contract exactly. So a smart contract is very simply a computer program that is set up on the blockchain. The blockchain itself is basically just a computer network. And so that smart contract will consist of the code that drives its functionality, as well as the data that's resulting from the transactions that have happened with the smart contract. So users, in a typical case, the smart contract has some sort of functionality that the users are aware of. The users will send transactions into the smart contract, and then one of the attractions of it is that the smart contract will self-execute on whatever the commands are that the users have sent through. And so smart contracts can govern activity between users, or it can also reference to third-party or external events as well. So, for example, you could do sports betting. You could do things that reference to external asset prices like stock prices or things like that. And to get that type of external information, what you're looking at, those types of external data sources are called oracles. So, what is the appeal and what are the risks of smart contracts? So, the idea. One of the key fundamental reasons that people are attracted to smart contracts is the idea that there is transparency and there is provable fairness. Why is that? The reason is because smart contracts reside on the blockchain. That means they can be examined by external parties, anybody that wants to look under the hood and can see the code to see how the contract was meant to be executed. Also, tied into the more general concepts around crypto, there's the idea that smart contracts can be accessed by anyone around the world. There's the idea of anonymity or enhanced anonymity anyways, as well as wider audiences or market shares. The risks that go along with this, though, are that these smart contracts aren't really bound by legal processes, by government oversight, by regulation in most cases today. And so what that means is there's a lack of consumer protection. It can be difficult to ensure any losses or any potential losses that happen through a smart contract. And just generally, the oversight from regulators, from law enforcement, from any other parties is limited. And then the last point we've got here as a risk is that although the code of a smart contract is public on the blockchain, there can be parts of the code that can obfuscate where control of the smart contract actually resides. And so there is a risk that somebody has control over the smart contract that you are not aware of as a user. And so how do smart contracts get used? So probably the biggest driver of the development of smart contracts has been the idea of decentralized finance. And so one of the very common uses in decentralized finance is what are called decentralized cryptocurrency exchanges. So in the last session, we were hearing about Binance and other cryptocurrency exchanges like that are centralized. Basically, what that means is they're a business as we typically understand that. There is a management, there is a corporate entity, and if you have an issue, you have somebody to turn to. With decentralized exchanges, it basically takes the activity that can be done through a traditional centralized cryptocurrency exchange, and it makes it self-executing through smart contracts. You can also have borrowing and lending platforms. Derivatives transactions can also happen through smart contracts, as well as the idea of wrapped tokens. And wrapped tokens are a given token backed by another token. But outside of DeFi, what are some of the things that happen through smart contracts? You can have fungible tokens, as we've said here. So fungible tokens are cryptocurrencies where any given token is equal to another. Non-fungible tokens are NFTs, which were also talked about and have become wildly popular in the last year and a half. Gaming, gambling, things like that. As well as this last point we've got here is a DAO, which is it's kind of a new concept of a way that users can self-govern an arrangement, basically. And looking to the future, what are potential ways that smart contracts could be used? They could be used in kind of traditional finance applications like trade finance. It's theoretically possible that they could be applied in real estate, as well as a number of different applications, kind of depending on where the appetite of the market goes. We go to the next slide. To give an idea of the why smart contracts matter, we thought that this graph is maybe helpful. So as of today, the total value locked in smart contracts is around 105 billion US dollars. Back in November, it was over 200 billion, around 225 billion. And so there is a lot of money that is wrapped up in smart contract arrangements in DeFi. And so the mechanics of smart contracts, the potential to lose money or somehow to have an issue resulting from dealing with a smart contract is very real, and the amount of money at stake is actually also quite significant. And I guess just to put that into context, the overall cryptocurrency market today is worth around 1 trillion US dollars. So basically the amount of money currently locked in smart contracts is around 1/10 of the total value of cryptocurrencies. Go to the next slide.
Okay.
We'll start talking about Tether, and sorry, Luke, did you want me to just give an intro and then hand over to you?
Sorry, continue. There's a bit of lag, yeah.
So Tether is a US dollar linked stablecoin, as Jennifer mentioned, and is somewhat similar to Luna that Eric talked about previously. One of the key differences is that Tether, the company behind Tether, makes a claim that all of Tether's tokens are backed 100% by reserves held by the company. And we've included a screenshot in the top right corner of the slide showing what the company has set out as its reserves. The idea of a stable coin is attractive to a number of people because it's meant to be pegged to a reference point, in this case to the US dollar. The way it is actually done, though, is through a smart contract. And in the case of Tether, that's done through Ethereum, through the Ethereum blockchain and its technology. And so Luke is going to talk through that from there.
Thanks, Brent. So yeah, so the as Brent mentioned, that so the smart contract itself is implemented on Ethereum. Ethereum is probably the most popular place to go and implement your smart contracts. You can actually go and see this the contract if you go to that link in the PowerPoint. We'll share it later, and you can actually read the code yourself. But we'll go through a few parts of it in here. The contract is only around 450 lines of code, so it's not massive. However, what it does do, it actually implements inherits functions from the standard ECR20 library. So the ECR20 is the standard template on Ethereum for fungible tokens. So if you make any sort of fungible token on Ethereum, you can use ECR20, and that will give you all the standard functions for that kind of coin. So being able to transfer it, being able to get the balance of any sort of account, being able to query it to get the total supply in the market. So what we can see here on screen is an extract of part of the code from the Tether smart contract. Hopefully everyone can read it. So I'll just, those who have never seen code before, hopefully it's pretty readable, but there's 2 bits I'll point out. So the first is, you'll see some parts in italics with the stars. These are comments. So these are comments put in there by the developer to remind them what the code is supposed to be doing. So at the top, you can see it says at dev, the ownable constructor sets the original owner of the contract to the sender of the account. So this is a comment. This doesn't actually do anything in the execution. And then below it, you actually have the piece of code which is supposed to do what they say. The reason I wanted to point this out, it's the first, I guess, concept of a smart contract or code is, unlike maybe a written contract where all words are sort of equal, you kind of have 2 things going on in a smart contract. You've got things written by someone about how it should work or what it should be doing that don't actually execute. Then you've got the actual execution piece of the code. So not all contracting is equal in a smart contract, maybe different to a normal legally written contract. So we just quickly look at this. We'll just go through a few things. So, what is this saying? It says this contract actually has an owner. So Tether has the concept of an owner. Someone owns the contract. There's actually a function in here to check if anyone sending a message to the contract is the owner. So it knows if the owner is talking to it versus someone who's not the owner. The owner most likely being the company running Tether, but who knows? It's a wallet ID, right? We don't really know who it is. And then the third bit is that they can actually transfer the owner to a new address. That's what this is doing. If we look at the actual main sort of function of Tether, it's going to be the transfer function because people are normally sending it around. So this is kind of what the contract looks like. You can see that it's public, so any user on the blockchain can actually go and call it. To do so, what they need to do is they send a message, they actually send a message not to the person they're transferring the money to, but they send the message to the smart contract. And when they send that message to the smart contract, they say, I'd like to use your transfer function, the smart contract. And then they give it the address of the person they want to transfer the money to, which you can see there, and the value. So that's what they pass in. So then it will go and do it. You can actually see this implementation has a fee. So many people don't know this because I'm pretty sure Tether still is free. The fee is 0, but you can see they've pre-coded into this contract actually the ability to have a fee in the future. And what this is showing is that the send amount, which is the amount that will be sent, is subtracted from the fee. So in the future, if there's a fee on this contract and I send $50 million in to send to someone, if the fee's $1 million, that person's only going to get 49 million. And you can actually see down here, the person who's going to get that fee is the owner. Some other things in Tether that useful to know is, there's this idea of a blacklist. So you can add people to the blacklist, you can remove people from the blacklist, and you can actually destroy blacklist funds. So that will remove them from the supply, and it basically clears them out of the of the person who owns them. So the balances of the blacklisted user is basically set to 0. You can see, however, that this is only available to the owner. So this function public only owner checks that the person trying to call these functions is the owner of the contract. So, so we'll just go to the next slide. And so this function that we're looking at here is, so if you remember, we looked at the fee we saw earlier in the code for the transfer. So this is the function that actually allows the owner to set fees. So the owner at any point, whenever they want, can call this function and can pass in the new basis points amount and the new maximum fee, and that will actually set it. Now, what they've done when they've implemented this smart contract is you can see they've put a maximum in here. So they've said the maximum basis points is always going to be 20 and the maximum fee is always going to be 50. And that's to provide future, so people know in the future that the fees can never be raised above that point. So there is, while the owner does have some control, they can never actually raise the fees above that amount, because if they do, this function will actually reject and it won't let them actually change the fee. So that provides that sort of transparency on the market about what the fees are going to be in the future for this type of contract. The final thing that I just want to point out around smart contracts is they have this idea of events. So when certain bits of code executes, it calls what's called an event, and that event is basically posted, so it's easy for people to see what's happening. So this function posts an event, which basically posts params and then the new values which are put in. Now, I couldn't find an example of them doing that because I don't think they've actually ever called this one, but the transfer event is also a postable event. And you can see, so when a transfer occurs in this smart contract, it'll post the transfer event. You can see there at the bottom right, and it will say, what was the address from, what was the address to, and what was the value? So in this way, people can go in and see, okay, what this smart contract is basically posting events so people can have transparency about what's going on. So if I wanted to initiate a transaction using using the Tether smart contract, well, let's say Alice wants to send Tether to Bob, right, on Ethereum. So what she would need to do is sign a message containing her address, which is her proof that of sort of ownership of her wallet or her address. Then she would need to put the destination address as the Tether smart contract. So the Tether smart contract appears like a normal user on Ethereum. It has an address. Then she puts the message in. So she'd put the message she wants to use the transfer function. And as part of that, she would need to put in Bob's address and the value she wants to send. And then she needs to also put in a maximum transaction fee, or how much transaction fee that she wants to pay. It's called gas in Ethereum. So then Alice, so that transaction fee, just to be clear, it's not the transaction fee we saw in the code earlier. It's a separate transaction fee, which is how Ethereum runs. And so in Ethereum, the way it's designed is that you need to pay a transaction for your code to be executed, a fee. That's by design to basically stop people putting unnecessary code and kind of clogging up the blockchain. So to actually have, when you put the transaction on, she'd submit it to what's called the mempool. And then the people who are running the blockchain, the validators, will come in, pick that transaction up with other transactions. They will process it and do all the crypto to validate that the transaction is correct. And then it gets included in the blockchain, and they get paid basically the gas fee for doing that work. So what can actually go wrong, you know, in sort of this smart contract situation? So you could have a situation where it executes on the blockchain, but not as expected due to human error. So Alice could put the wrong receiver address in, so the funds just go to someone completely different wallet. She mistyped, you know, Bob's address. As long as it's a legitimate wallet, it's going to go through. Like this, you don't have. This is not like a bank transfer where you have to put the name and the bank account number, and the bank's checking it's the right account holder. It's just going to go through. Or Alice could forget there's a transaction fee, so she tries to send Bob $10 million, but there's a transaction fee. Bob only gets, you know, a little bit less than that. And then he rings up and complains. The second thing is it could execute on the blockchain, but actually the smart contract logic prevents the intended user action. So the owner in Tether, we didn't look at it, but they actually can pause the Tether contract. So they can stop all transfers. So if she'd sent this in when it was paused, it wouldn't execute. Or if Bob was on the blacklist, again, the transfer wouldn't work. And sorry, I shouldn't say it doesn't execute. The transaction itself will execute on the blockchain. The code will process, but the resolution of the code will be, I cannot do this transfer. And so it would basically not take the money out of her wallet. It would either basically return the funds back to her and not do the transfer. The final thing that could happen actually is it doesn't execute on the blockchain. So potentially she hasn't used enough gas, or the gas price has changed, and therefore the validators have said, you haven't paid us enough money, and therefore the transaction basically just doesn't execute. It kind of goes halfway through the code and then stops. So if I just quickly look at what an executed transaction looks like here, interestingly, this is actually just a random one we chose, but it is an implementation of a swap contract called Uniswap v3. And someone has tried to swap 1.5 Ether for this other coin called Saitama, which I don't know what it is. And you can see that there's a number of token transfers happening in the middle. And down the bottom, you can see that there's also a gas amount in that red box, and they've used 75% of the gas and it's executed. So this sort of shows you what's happened in the whole contract. So unlike sort of a blockchain contract, like a Bitcoin swap, a lot of things can happen in a smart contract. You can have multiple transfers happening all at the same time. You can have the smart contract doing things internally. You can have the smart contract talking to other smart contracts. So in this case, the Uniswap v3 has spoken to Uniswap v2 and done something with its other smart contract. So it can be a much more complicated layering of transactions. And if we look at what a failed transaction looks like, so this one has failed. You can actually see, so you can see the from address, the to addresses, the actual contract, and it said error encountered during execution, out of gas, and a little frowny face. So, and you can see down the bottom, the gas limit and usage was 100%. So it basically got to the limit and then it stopped executing. So that's what a failed transaction looks like in a smart contract on Ethereum. So what have we learned about Tether going through this? So even though it might be considered sort of DeFi, and we talk about this idea of decentralized finance, actually in this case, the owner has a significant amount of control over the contract. They can issue tokens, they can redeem tokens, they can blacklist things, they can destroy funds. They can basically do whatever they want. So while they can't do anything outside the code itself, they actually have a lot of control within the code in this implementation. And, you know, so what we didn't see in there is the ability for an owner to do a transfer, right? So an owner can't necessarily, in this case, directly transfer funds back if there's an issue. But what could they do? So there's a few things they could do. So they could obviously ask the recipient to return it, or they've got all these other functions they could use to kind of fudge the system. So they could stick the person who got the funds in there on the blacklist and zero their account, destroy the funds, reissue tokens to themselves, and then transfer those tokens back. So there's a lot of remedies they actually do have in here that are maybe not as obvious when you look at their ability. So while they technically can't reverse a transaction, they could go and right the wrongs of a bad transaction, in this case with Tether. So I'll just pause there. Jennifer, is there anything you wanted to add after that? Or we'll go on to the next section. Yeah. So we're going to just walk now into a case study. And so maybe just to set the context, a lot of crypto disputes at the moment, let's call them disputes in inverted commas, they're really around the ownership of tokens, right? So someone has accidentally sent a token to someone, or it's been phished, or it's been stolen. And this occurs because there could be an exploit of code. So there's been some exploits of smart contract code. And again, when we say exploit, that's a loaded term. You know, maybe the person acted within the bounds of the smart contract, or they would have had to, but they went outside kind of what the intention of the smart contract was. And then effectively, again, in inverted commas, steals tokens from people. So that plus, I think a lot of the cases that we looked at in the earlier session, my view, and we'll get Jennifer's after, is I don't think they're likely to end up in sort of, a formal arbitration, right? Because the key issue is getting the funds back. And that is really a theft issue. Often one party is individual, often they're anonymous. Parties, they probably don't have an arbitration clause or written into their contract, so there's no agreement about where it's going to happen. And the court remedies, might be needed. So you really want to kind of freeze their assets and things like that. So, it may go down the more sort of litigious route rather than sort of the arbitration route. However, I do think as smart contracts are now sort of being used by more mature corporate entities, and we see the example of Tether, right, which is a company which is trying to do something, it probably has separate off-book contracts with maybe some of its clients or people it interacts with. This is probably where I see more likely we're going to get sort of these complicated commercial disputes, and therefore, arbitration may be sort of a more preferred method to go and settle those. So, Jennifer, your thoughts?
And I think previously, these are very good points that you've mentioned, and we previously discussed, obviously the on-chain type disputes, which will be resolved, and there are triggers for that within the smart contracts. But there's obviously a need for off-chain ADR as well. So things that don't happen in the smart contract, but they've gone wrong, the contract doesn't really cater for it. There needs to be another kind of contract mechanism or ADR mechanism to really deal with, in that event, what actually happens. And that's where we would see arbitration coming in. There are obviously a lot of benefits to arbitration: confidentiality, procedural flexibility, enforceability, having a specialist tribunal, and also the speed. And from our previous discussions, I think we also mentioned that there needs to be a contract for the smart contract as well. And that's where we would also see, ADR, type, dispute resolution clauses that are catered, and probably tailored for arbitration to run there as well. Legal issues that are likely to arise within, the crypto and kind of blockchain space is also looking at the validity of the contracts, especially when some jurisdictions around the world doesn't actually recognize crypto as being lawful. And then obviously observing those changes in the law. Also looking at jurisdictional matters, which jurisdiction, has these transactions occurred, and who actually bears the ultimate risk for that. However, I think for all of the above to really work, there needs to be a built-in code and almost a pause, within the smart contract to allow for off-chain ADR type procedures to take place.
Yeah, and I think that's an interesting point. Like, is there in the future, the idea of building ADR into the actual code? So if there is a dispute, there's some sort of mechanism, and maybe it's by an independent party who can actually go in with an address and say, I'm the dispute resolutor. Can I actually pause this contract or take these tokens or freeze them on behalf of, as an independent person on the chain? And that is something that I don't think I've heard of it yet, but I think as we move to the future, it's something I think to consider.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the more that people use smart contracts and kind of find potential gaps in them, that there will be a need to draft those in as well, or code it in.
Okay, so I want to sort of just walk through like a case study now. So this case study we've sort of made up, but we want to sort of explore like what would a potential, I guess, arbitration scenario look like around a smart contract. So let's look at a case. So we've got a smart contract called Crypto Loan that we've built on the Ethereum blockchain. It's being built by leading financial institutions to basically be able to do a collateralized cryptocurrency exchange, which I'll talk about that in a sec. So if we look at how this happened, you've got this conglomerate of banks. We'll call them Apple Bank was the lead developer. So they're the ones who went and sort of helped develop it, but obviously all the banks in the conglomerate sort of put the money in to develop it so they can all use it, which would be pretty common. It's an infrastructure system for them. So it will probably be a somewhat closed system. It's probably not open to the public, but it's still like a blockchain decentralized system. So the way it works is the lender transfers cryptocurrency to be loaned into the smart contract system, and specifies, how long they're willing to loan it for, and the collateral they want to do the loan. And then the borrower, basically, they want to accept the loan, they can then transfer the collateral in, which would have to be a coin, like it'd have to be an on-chain asset. And then they basically then automatically receive the cryptocurrency to be borrowed. And then the smart contract basically says, if you return the amount before the loan's up, you get your collateral back. If you don't, the collateral gets automatically sent to the loaner. So why would you want something like this? It's probably going to be used in some sort of hedging type arrangement where you want to borrow some coins for some sort of financial thing, so an example that we see here is, so let's say the lender says, I'll do 1 Bitcoin for 1 month for US $50,000. And maybe it's a hedge play because they think it's going to go up or down. So then the lender puts that up. The borrower says, yep, I want to accept that. So they send their Tether, 50,000 Tether, into the smart contract system, and they get sent their 1 Bitcoin to them when that happens. And then the smart contract actually holds that 50,000 Tether in it. And that's what Brent mentioned before about the value locked. So basically this smart contract has locked that 50,000 Tether inside it while it waits to execute. So then 2 things might happen. So if the value of Bitcoin drops to US, basically US 40,000, because Tether's 1-to-1, the borrower says, well, my original collateral is worth more, so I'll return the 1 Bitcoin and I'll get my $50,000 back because the Bitcoin's only worth 40. So they send it back. If Bitcoin has gone up, they say, well, actually, I'm going to keep my Bitcoin now because it's worth 60. So I'll forfeit my collateral of $50,000. I'll keep my Bitcoin of 60. I've made $10,000. So this is the way that an example of how they might use a smart contract in this kind of case. So let's look at an actual case of what could happen. So big bank offers the crypto loan contract for 100 Bitcoin, 5 mil US. 1 month duration. They put it up on the 4th of February. So then Cat Bank wants to take the loan. So they say, okay, I send my money into the smart contract system. I send my 5 million Tether in. Smart contract looks at it, says, yep, you've got the Tether. I'm taking it, accepts a transaction, and it executes at 8:04. It executes at 8:04 blockchain node time. Now, I mentioned before about the mempool. When you send a transaction in crypto, it doesn't automatically execute. They get pulled on Ethereum. They get pulled and they get executed a little bit later. So it might take a little bit of time for your transaction to actually execute. And the blockchain node time isn't known until it's actually executed on the node, right? So they often, the time of when you physically send the message and the time it executes, there could be a lag time of up to 10, 15 minutes sometimes. So just after lunch, just one month after, so it's a 1 month contract. If the value of Bitcoin halves, then Cat Bank is definitely going to want to return its Bitcoin and get its US back because it's worth twice as much. So at 5 p.m, they email the counterparty and say, look, we're going to return the loan and we're going to send the Bitcoin back via the smart contract system. They sign the transaction at 7:55, put it onto the mempool. And that's about 9 minutes before the cutoff time of 8:04, 5 March. And then they check their USD, their Tether balance at 8:10, and the money's not back. So what's happened? So what could have gone wrong? Does anyone in the room or on chat want to have a guess about what are some of the things that could have gone wrong of why their money has not been returned to them as per the contract? Don't know if you've got the chat up, Jennifer. No, okay. So a lot of things could have happened. So they could have sent the message to the wrong contract address, right? They could have just stuffed up the transaction. The transaction could not have actually executed on the chain. They didn't put enough gas into it. The transaction could have taken more than 15 minutes to execute. So when it actually executed, by the time it executed on the chain, it was after the cutoff of 804. And therefore the code, it's over the 1 month period. So the code says, sorry, it's too late. The loan's already done, that the time's up. They maybe didn't have enough Bitcoin in their wallet to transfer back. So depending on the way that the contract was implemented, they might have had to give an address where that Bitcoin was to say, this is where you can take the Bitcoin from. And they didn't have enough in it. So it said, I've accepted you're trying to repay the loan, but I can't get the Bitcoin from you. So I'm not going to execute the repayment. Or there could be any number of other logic bugs sort of sitting there in the code that cause it not to execute. So in this case, you're really looking for sort of a blockchain sort of coding expert to go in and try and work out what has exactly happened in this. So let's assume we do that and we see what's actually happened. So effectively, what I've created here is a scenario which happens all the time in computer programming for those who've done it, where someone has basically stuffed up a timestamp. I won't read out the whole slide here. I'll let people read it. But effectively, what's happened is someone's forgotten there's 29 days in February during leap years. Their code has assumed 28 days. That's effectively created a 1 day gap in the timing of kind of what the smart contract thinks. So it's thinking 1 month from the 5th of Feb is the 4th of March, not the 5th of March. And that's what's caused the logic issue. Now, this is actually something that could happen on the blockchain because of actually the computers, especially a lot of these blockchain systems, they don't recognize years or months. They only recognize seconds, because even a year is 365.25 days and there's leap seconds and things like that. So they struggle to sort of deal with non-second based time because it's not our calendars are not exactly aligned to science. So you tend to have seconds and convert things in. So this could be a real example. So what happens? So Cat Bank says, hey, look, we tried to return the transaction. We told you we're returning the transaction. You know, it was in the 1 month contract. We want our money back. And then the other bank says, sorry, you know, code is law. This is what a lot of the programmers say, and we're keeping the tether. So resolving the dispute. So, you know, what are some of the things that might be relevant to this, right? So what is the actual contract between Big Bank and Cat Bank in this case? Is there a separate commercial contract that actually even exists under the smart contract? In that contract, is the term month sufficiently defined as what 1 month is? Is the code actually transparent, and could Cat Bank have gone and looked at the code and seen in the implementation that, yeah, it actually is 28 days for February every month, even in leap years? Does that email they sent back mean anything? You know, because that's sort of also part of the, I guess, the discussions. And what about the code comments? So what happens if the comments in the code conflict with the actual execution of the code? So you see, I'll put an example there. The programmer said, calculate the same day of the following month for 1 month contracts. And then they've added 28 days. Now, they've probably intended for that to be the same. They've said the same day of the following month, which would be, you know, 5th of Feb to 5th of March, except in leap years. And so in leap years, that still should happen based on the comment, but they've failed in the implementation of the actual code to make that happen. So what trumps here? Is it the comment, or is it the actual code execution, which is more important? And then what about the role of Apple Bank? Because Apple Bank was actually the developer who was paid by these people to actually build the smart contract on behalf of all the participants. So did they actually build it incorrectly? You know, and what does incorrectly mean? Was there actually design specification documents? Did the party of banks agree that 28 days was the number to be used, you know, for February? You know, is there any sort of design documentation specifying that? Were they actually programmed it wrong, or was it maybe ambiguous interpretation from the start? And then what was the responsibility of each party in the group to actually test and accept their work? You know, because that might, again, there could be an argument that, hey, we did the smart contract, we had a UAT, everyone tested it, you know, on a blockchain with fake money before we actually went live with this. So sorry, but you know, you should have raised this issue when you were testing. So these are some of the I guess the concepts that would be relevant to the dispute. And you can see a lot of this would really get into the expert evidence around two areas. One is what's the code actually doing? Two is the more sort of typical arbitration around IT disputes that generally are going on at the moment that happen when someone's supposed to build something for someone and they don't do it correctly and something goes wrong. So I think I'll pause there. Hopefully that's given everyone a good view of kind of where we might be going with smart contracts and arbitration. And Jennifer, I'm sure you've got some things to share as well.
Yeah, I think in terms of, obviously looking at the scenario that Luke has just mentioned, it's really for practitioners to find out, who is ultimately liable. And there's going to be both, two sides arguing different things. So it's really looking at the contract. So either the commercial contract underpinning the smart contract, or as I mentioned, if in the future there is kind of those off-chain developments, I think it'll be interesting to see where those liabilities lie there as well. And, even in this scenario, looking at Apple Bank, it might not just be, a contractual claim that you've got against Apple Bank. It might also be worth exploring tortious type claims. So the duty of care, having a look at whether there is that duty, but that obviously depends on the arrangement in those different types of scenarios. But very more than often it happens with claims against IT professionals, and especially in the building of software, there is always a type of duty owed. So definitely worth for the practitioners to explore further there if they do encounter these claims. Anything further from Luke or Brent?
I think that's our slides for Q&A. Brent, anything?
Nope, nothing to add to that.
So I think
We seem to have quite a shy audience today, so I'm going to ask the floor again. Are there any questions for Luke or Brent? No? Okay. I'll close off the session, and I'd like to thank obviously Luke and Brent for the second session and for PwC for putting this together as well. Thank you everyone for attending, and if you have any questions after this, feel free to reach out to Hong Kong 45 or to Luke and Brent at PwC. Thank you.
Thanks everyone.